Let's hear you. Sing a little louder. We can actually fill this space with our voices. Let's try it. Four more times, each time more beautiful than the last.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
It is always such a treat to be in this space gathering together on Shabbat morning. And this Shabbat is a special Shabbat. We could probably find a reason for every Shabbat to be a special Shabbat. This Shabbat is special for a few reasons. One is that I know many of you are gathered here to watch our fellow community members be called to the Torah to become B'nai Mitzvah. That is one special reason. But also, this Shabbat is known as Shabbat Nachamu. It is the Shabbat right after Tisha B'Av. And if you've been paying close attention, we said last week that Tisha B'Av is the saddest moment in the Jewish calendar. That moment has passed. And so we come now to this first Shabbat to be comforted. That is what Nachamu means, to be comforted, to be consoled. Now, I don't want you to get too comfortable in this space. I hope that you might feel challenged too. I hope you might find things that surprise you. But this is our chance to feel comforted in some way by words of Torah, by a friendly smile, someone new perhaps, and also just simply being in this space to observe Shabbat. Because as we often say, for 6 weeks we work for 6 days, maybe for weeks, feels like weeks, for 6 days we work really, really hard to prove ourselves, to prove our value. But we come to this space and we engage with this prayer book and we say these words to remind ourselves that we have inherent worth simply because we are alive. We are here this morning to do exactly that, to be alive together. Now, in order to do that, you can't just sit. You have to really think. You have to really sing. You have to really pray. And so this prayer book is a vessel for you. It's an opportunity for you to engage with new ideas, perhaps, or familiar ones, to really try to tap into what it means to be alive. Now, in that spirit of being alive and being fully present, I want to ask you to please silence all of your phones. No judgment there. Silence all of your phones. Put all of your devices away for the next couple hours so that we can really be present in this space together. In that spirit of gratitude, in the spirit of thinking about what it means to be alive, we turn first to our bodies. We turn to the words of Asher Yatzar. We'll have a musical setting, a contemporary setting of the traditional prayer, but you'll find the traditional text on page 194. And that blessing that reminds us of our bodies, that blessing that thanks God for the fact that we could even get here today, we'll say in Hebrew as part of this English setting as well. Page 194.
I thank you for my life, body and soul. Help me realize I am beautiful and whole. I'm perfect the way I am, and a little broken too. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. I thank you for my life, body and soul. Help me realize I am beautiful and whole. Help me realize I am beautiful and whole. I'm perfect the way I am and a little broken too. I'm perfect the way I am and a little broken too. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. Oh, here comes some more. Oh, higher, louder. Oh, and even more. Oh, the middle of 194. Baruch atah Adonai, rofeh kol basar u'mavli la'asot. Once again, Baruch atah, Baruch atah Adonai. אשר נתן לשכל ובינה להבחין בין יום ובין לילה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, פוקח עברים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, מתיר אסורים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, זוקף כפופים. 200. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who stretches the earth over the waters. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who strengthens our steps. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who clothes the naked. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who gives strength to the weary. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. 202. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. Shasani b'tselem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Yisrael with strength. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor. We're turning now to page 218, and we're going to invite you to please rise and to please come up here with your prayer book, and let's make a circle all the way around this lectern. To my left, to Rabbi Green's right, in front of us, maybe even behind us. Come all the way up. Come all the way up with your body, with your prayer book, with the people you came with. We're going to get closer. We're going to get more spirited. We are going to raise our spirits and our energy and our volume. And we're on page 218. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Robin's clapping, we're all clapping. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. 218. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, Kerovu. Here we go. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. We need you. Come on. Hallelujah, hallelujah. This is happening and you're a part of it. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, v'teika shofar. Hallelujah, v'nevel v'tino. Hallelujah, v'tofu mavot. Hallelujah, v'minim v'ugav. Everyone now. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Can't hear you. We can do so much better. Come on. Oh, here we are. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, v'tzirtzalei Shama. Hallelujah, v'tzirtzalei Truah. Kol hanshama tehallelya. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. You can breathe. Hallelujah, hallelujah. And that's a miracle. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Wow, Rabbi Green, I think they were getting into it.
I think so. You
yeah,
didn't
just
know.
a little bit. It's hard to tell through the mask, but I think maybe some people were.
I heard some of us singing pretty loud up here, but also I'm guessing some of you didn't know when you walked into this space that that's what you were signing up for. But here you are, and you did beautifully. That was awesome. We're woken up. It's now time to say Shabbat Shalom to someone new or someone familiar. Take a minute. We'll come back together in just a second.
Shabbat Shalom, Serach. We love you. Thank you so much for greeting each other warmly. We're going to stay here and continue in our service on page 224 with Chatzi Kaddish. We're all facing this way towards Jerusalem. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בהגהלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל מלאכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. 226 ברכו את אדוני המבורך. To our seats. This is a prayer for morning light. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzei or uvorei choshech oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Again, 228. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
please join me at the top of page 229. In the beginning, even then, a new light was sown for the righteous, a promise that your light would become the catalyst, first for order and then for hope. Author of language and light, help us to use words as you have, to cast light into dark waters and draw out justice and truth. Baruch atah Adonai, Yatzar hameorot. That blessing for light, that familiar perhaps phrase, blessing God for light, is in many ways literal in the morning time, but it's also, of course, a metaphor for Torah, for learning. We move into a next part of our service, a next part of our liturgy, that's all focused around the learning specifically of the Shema. Now, if you're familiar with any prayer, one prayer maybe in Judaism, it's probably the Shema. But even if you don't yet know what that is, this is the most sacred text that we have, the most sacred phrase and prayer from our Torah. And it comes from this week's Torah portion. We'll say a little bit more about the paragraphs of the Shema later and how they're all about love in addition to faith. The reason the Shema is important is because it's our watchword of faith. It is our statement of belief in God. But in the paragraphs that follow, it's really also about showing our faith, showing our love by way of the commandments. And many of you know that we're going to have 3 B'nai Mitzvah be called to this lectern in just a minute, or just a little bit later in the service. And we've got that word mitzvah right there in B'nai, bar, bat, bi, mitzvah, a commandment. One of the things we've talked about in our adult B'nai Mitzvah cohort is that a commandment is fundamentally a relationship. Mitzvah doesn't literally mean commandment. It comes really close, but it's really hard to translate what a mitzvah actually is. And on some level, a mitzvah is an expression of the relationship between us and God, perhaps a commander and a commanded, and our relationship with one another. Now, that may be a new phrasing, or it may be a new understanding of what a mitzvah is. You can chew on that throughout this service, but the idea is that as we engage with this book and these ideas, we are supposed to not drop our tallis, but we are supposed to really feel as if we are in relationship with something, someone, some community, some being perhaps, expressed through Torah and expressed also through love. So on page 230, we have the beginning of the prayers for the Shema, getting into the Shema, that yet again draw our mind to ahava, to love. Page 230.
Talmud הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. Near the bottom of page 230. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו. כי אל פועל ישועות אתה, ובנו בחרת, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול. סלע באמת להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. On page 232, the words of Shema in the Torah cantillation in which they're read this very week. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Page 234. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם, אמת. Page 240. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות ספר שירה חדשה, שיבחו גאולים לשמך שפת הים יחד כולם, הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. We rise together. סוד ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל, ופדי חין נאומך יהודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
The first part of that prayer, Michamocha, also comes directly from Torah. So this week, the Shabbat, we have special reason to think about how all or so many of these words are either rooted in Torah or directly come from the Torah itself. And you may remember from last week when we opened the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, from which we are reading these next few weeks, we said that Devarim means words. There are a whole lot of words in this prayer book, in the Torah, as we will be reading. But in order to engage with them, first we have to open up our lips. And on page 242, we begin the Amidah with those words, that prayer of opening up our lips, so that we are actually able to engage with these words, so that they are not just words, but something deeper. Prayers, intentions, hopes for ourselves. Moving into this Amidah with the first few parts sung out loud, prayed together, and then prayed silently.
שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Adonai, 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 Adonai. 244, Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu ve'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, ve'Koneh HaKol, ve'Zocher Chasdei Avot ve'Imahot, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. 246, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיים מתים אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. 248, נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וכרזה אל זה, ואמר קדוש, קדוש, קדוש אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר, אדירנו, אדוני, אדוננו, מה אדיר שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, מלכנו, הוא מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש, בשבחך אלוהינו, מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ברוך אתה אדוני האל HaKadosh. We continue silently through page 261, using the words of these pages, using the words of these hearts. When we've each finished our prayers, we may be seated.
Try singing that together. Words from Isaiah chapter 40, which Penelope will chant momentarily. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. Take comfort, comfort my people. Yomar Elohechem, says your God. This melody is in 3/4 time, which many people find to be the most comforting of time signatures. makes you want to sway, makes you want to feel your heartbeat in time with the rhythm. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar. Yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar Elohechem. Same thing in a higher register. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, nachamu ami, yomar Elohechem.
I'd now like to call forward Joanna Pressman to offer us a few greetings and perhaps an announcement, or just greetings, on behalf of our Board of Trustees.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Let me start by saying thank you to our clergy for leading us today, Rabbi Matt Green and Cantor Josh Breitzer. And thank you also to Gabby Savransky, who is providing sound and online support, as well as our entire CBE staff, led by our Executive Director, Mark Flaxer, for all that they do to make it possible for us to gather here today. I want to, of course, welcome everybody here, as well as folks online, with a special welcome to everybody who's here to celebrate with the three folks who are becoming B'nai Mitzvah today, Alvaro Bernal, Robin Baker, and Penelope Deuce. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. And we'll just quickly say that at the conclusion of the service today, we will make the blessings over grape juice or wine, make kiddush and motzi over the side here. Are we gathering elsewhere for more of a kiddush afterwards? We're going to gather downstairs in the rotunda for kiddush afterwards, and thank you to our B'nai Mitzvah today for sponsoring today's kiddush. Again, on behalf of the board, I want to just say thank you all for being here. You can find out anything you want to about CBE's upcoming programs on our website, cbebk.org. Thanks again, and Shabbat Shalom.
We also want to thank Mara Sandra for being here in person, wherever you are in the back there, for handing out some prayer books, among other things, greeting us. And there is one other announcement that I'd like to make. And Serach, I see you there by Zoom. Hi, Serach. Shabbat Shalom. Everyone say Shabbat Shalom, Serach. Hopefully you could hear that, Serach. Some of you know that Serach has been with us at CBE virtually for years now, especially these years of pandemic. This relationship was facilitated by virtual engagement. But Serach, you also deserve a mazel tov as we move into this B'nai Mitzvah portion of our time together, because you've been studying with us for 2 years and you've learned to chant from this week's Torah portion. And so we say Yasher Koach to you. And we hope that you fully engage with this moment especially, because you too are going to be here one day. We hope, we pray we'll make it happen. But mazel tov to you, Serach. And with that, Shabbat Shalom. With that, I want to call forward our B'nai Mitzvah here in this space, Alvaro, Robin, and Penelope, to come forward. And with you, Penelope, to bring your mom, Margaret Halbrin, and Alvaro, your husband, David Peraza, and William Baker, your son, Robin, to present you with your talises. Now, as you're walking up, I'll remind everyone that a talis, a talit, is a prayer shawl that has fringes on it to remind us of the mitzvot, those commandments that we talked about earlier. So we can now present these talises to our loved ones, and we'll make the blessing together. Ready? Go for it.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehitatef b'tzitzit.
Amen.
Yasher koach. And it is at this point that our Torah service formally begins, now that our B'nai Mitzvah have these prayer shawls, these talises. And so I want to call forward as well Jonah Parker, David, you're up here already, and Kathy and Dennis Ravino to help us as we open the ark. And then, in addition to that, for the processional thereafter, we'll have Martin Deuce, also David, and Karen Goldstein join us for walking around with the Torah after we open the ark. But first, it is time to open the ark and get these Torahs. So we rise, if we are able, and turn to page 362.
Ein kamocha b'Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kema'asecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memishartecha bechol dor v'dor. Shalom, Avarachamim, Eitiva virtzonecha, et Zion, Tivnech omot Yerushalayim, Tivnech omot Yerushalayim. Page 364. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. Udevar Adonai mirushalayim. 366. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah, Le'amo Yisrael, B'kedusha.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai Ti, Ramimbu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'har kodesho. Ramimbu, Ramimbu, Ramimbu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'har kodesho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu, Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Al shlosha devarim, Al shlosha devarim, Al shlosha devarim. Haolam omed. Keep clapping, folks. Come on. Al shlosha devarim, Al shlosha devarim. Al shlosha devarim, haolam omed. Get ready. Al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. You know this one. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Please be seated. This morning, we will soon be reading from Parshat Va'etchanan, but as we've noted, we have 3 B'nai Mitzvah. And so this Shabbat, we're going to do things a little bit differently in the order of things, and we're going to call up Robin to give her Devar Torah first, before we open the Torah and begin chanting.
Shabbat Shalom. Today is a unique and special occasion for me, but being here on Saturday morning is not. I've been a Shabbat morning regular for years, and so that's why I want to talk about a part of this week's Torah portion that's included in every Shabbat morning service. Earlier, right after the congregation communally chanted Shema to affirm that Adonai is our one God, we communally chanted the Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol avevcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha. That's the first line. And that part of this morning's liturgy is from this week's Torah portion, where it appears right after the verses that I will be chanting in a little while. That sentence that I just chanted translates to, "You shall love your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." So in case you're wondering, loving God is one of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. For those of you who like trivia, it's number 418. And that commandment to love God is one that is constantly applicable at all times and in all places. But what does it mean to be commanded to love God? Are we being commanded to feel a certain way? I will note that in this week's Parsha, God seems more fearsome than lovable. For example, here we are in the part of the narrative where God has denied Moses entry into the Promised Land, despite the fact that all Moses has done at God's behest. In this portion, God is described as a consuming fire, an impassioned God whose anger may blaze forth against you, wiping you off the face of the earth. And that consequence is threatened in one circumstance that is particularly troubling to me, for those of you who know my husband Will. This portion says, in part, "You shall not intermarry. Adonai's anger will blaze forth against you, promptly wiping you out." It hasn't happened yet. Some medieval commentary on the sentence that I'm addressing does suggest that we are commanded to feel love, but this medieval commentary does not provide an explanation that really satisfied me. Rabbeinu Bachya said, "Seeing that we have no other God, we are bound to love him." Not helpful, that's really like, because I said so. He continued, "The point of loving God is to perform his commandments out of a sense of love for him. If someone serves the Lord out of fear, his service is not of the best variety." And that's consistent with what Rashi said about 200 years earlier, "Fulfill his commands out of love, for one who acts out of love is not like him, is on a higher plane than one who acts out of fear. He who serves his master out of fear, if the master troubles him overmuch, leaves him and goes away." So to me, those two comments explain why it's good to love God, but don't really address what is supposed to cause us to have this feeling. There's some Hasidic commentary from the 18th and 19th centuries that I found more approachable. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi explained that the commandment is not to feel, but to engage in contemplation that should lead to the desired result, writing, "When one contemplates ideas that arouse a love for God in a general way, how God is our very life force, or in a more specific way by contemplating the greatness of God and the great love he has for us, this will arouse a reciprocal love for God." The Gerer Rebbe wrote, "Since you cannot command love where it does not already exist, and since the Torah does command such love, then the only logical conclusion is that there is ingrained in every Jewish heart a deep and abiding love for God and for Torah. There exists in every Jewish heart a nekuda, a dot or spark of love for things Jewish. Sometimes that nekuda is too small to be of value, is covered up with superficial rust, it is hidden by material desires and pursuits, but it's there. And the commandment to love God is the command to each and every one of us to be conscious of it, to develop that nekuda, to nurture it and express it." Well, rather than any of those, the approach to the commandment to love that I can most relate to is that it's actually a directive to act. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev taught that we show our love for God by loving other people, writing, "Whether a person really loves God can be determined by the love he or she bears towards others, because we are all created B'Tselem Elohim in God's image. When we show love and respect towards others, we're also showing love and respect towards God." The modern version of Torah commentary, the Plaut edition that we use here at CBE, you'll all be referring to it shortly, writes about this portion by saying, "Love, as we use the term today, is not a proper rendering of the biblical term ahava, which actually indicates an action more than an inward state, overt demonstration of loyalty to God." And it continues, "While love as such cannot be the subject of command, actions leading to love can be. Each mitzvah done in the right spirit is an act of loving God." So perhaps that interpretation resonates with me because it evokes an analogy from my childhood. So I grew up in a family that was much more culturally Jewish than religiously Jewish, and watching Fiddler on the Roof was a form of Jewish observance. So most of you who are familiar with that show and movie will recall at one point Tevye asks his wife, "Do you love me?" And Golda responds with a song, and in part, "For 25 years I've lived with him, fought with him, starved with him. For 25 years my bed is his. If that's not love, what is?" Action. So we love family members and friends by acting to care for and support them, even in the moments when we may not exactly feel emotional warmth and fuzziness. And to avoid embarrassing anyone here, I will not elaborate any further on that point. But as with a human loved one, I can understand loving God in terms of action. And so for me, my participation in the adult B'nai Mitzvah class has been a step towards trying to love God through the particular action of engaging with Torah. Rabbeinu Bachya, who I quoted earlier, also wrote, "The way this love for God expresses itself is by studying the laws of the Torah and by obtaining a better understanding of what God expects from us through such study. To analogize to my day job for a large corporation, we self-assess our performance each year and give ourselves ratings. If I assess how I've been doing in loving God through appropriate actions, I'd give myself a pretty good rating for observing Shabbat and key events in the Jewish calendar, and for loving and respecting those in the CBE community and beyond through serving on the board and committees and advocating to change unjust laws. But when it comes to Torah, I'd give myself a G rating for growth needed. So I didn't have a Jewish education when I was growing up, and on my adult journey into Jewish practice, I've focused mostly on memorizing the prayers and rituals. Even now, I can only read Hebrew in like kindergarten level. And I've heard Torah expounded on in all the Shabbat morning services I've attended over the years, and I will say, not just that ban on intermarriage, there are a lot of parts that I find really challenging. So before this class, I had done a little to personally and directly try to connect or grapple with Torah and to reflect on what it commands. This class gave me that opportunity. I'm grateful for being able to learn about Torah from Rabbi Green, from Raz Koch, and from all of my classmates. Going forward, I may observe only a fraction of the 613 mitzvot, and I can't quite see myself regularly volunteering to chant Torah on Shabbat morning services. Those musical note sequences are kind of a challenge to learn, but I do look forward to continuing to engage with Torah. Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher Koach Rabin. And now with those words of Torah, that intro for us into Parashat Va'et-Chanan, it is now time to actually chant from this Torah. And if you're following along in another book, you have another book called The Torah. It's more than just the Torah, but it says The Torah on it. It's a little bit bigger. And if anyone has it there, Avra, would you hold it up? Hold it up so everyone can see it. It is that book that you need. Excellent. And in there, you'll find our reading. We're reading from the book of Deuteronomy, beginning with chapter 4, verse 25. And you'll find this on page 1191. So again, in the Chumash, in that big book, page 1191, we'll be beginning Deuteronomy 4, verse 25. And for our first aliyah, we call forward Penelope Deuce as our bat mitzvah.
תעמוד, 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 בחורה בת המצווה הראשונה, רבקה חנה, במריה דלמתנה לי על התורה, חזקי וימצאי.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai mevorach leolam vaed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach leolam vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol hamim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Ki tolid banim uvnei vanim, v'noshantem ba'aretz, v'hishchatem. V'asitem pesel temunat kol, v'asitem hara, be'enei Adonai Elohecha lehachiso. Ha'idoti v'chem hayom et hashemayim ve'et ha'aretz, ki avod tovedun maher me'al ha'aretz, asher atem overim et hayarden, shama larishtach lo ta'arichun yamim aleha, ki hishamed tishamedun. V'hefitz Adonai etchem ba'amim, v'nishartem mitei mispar ba'goyim, asher yenaheg Adonai etchem shama. Vavadtem sham Elohim Maaseh Yedei Adam Eitz va'even asher lo yirun v'lo yishme'un v'lo yochlun v'lo yirichun uvikashtem misham et Adonai Elohecha umatzata ki tidrashanu b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha batzar lecha umatzaucha kol hadvarim ha'ele ba'acharit hayamim v'shavta ad Adonai Elohecha v'shamata b'kolo. Ki el racham Adonai Elohecha lo yarpecha v'lo yashchitecha v'lo yishkach et berit avotecha asher nishba lahem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam nota betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Yasher Koach. For our second aliyah, we now call forward Alvaro Bernal, as well as David Peraza, to join us up here for this aliyah.
Yamon, 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 b'chol bar mitzvah, Ezra Levi ben Avraham v'Sara, l'aliyah laTorah, chazak v'amatz. Now, Alvaro, you're skipping further ahead in chapter 4, right? Starting with verse 40, which you can find in your Torah commentaries on page 1193. Chapter 4, verse 40, page 1193.
Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'et. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Veshamarta et chukav v'et mitzvotav asher anochi mitzavcha hayom asher yitav lecha ulvanecha acharecha Ulma'an ta'arich yamim al ha'adama asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha kol hayamim. Az yavdil Moshe shalosh arim be'ever hayarden Mizrecha Shamesh Lanus Shama Rotseach Asher Yirtzach Et Re'ehu Biflitaat Vehu Lo Sonei Lo Mitmol Shilshom Venas El Achat Min He'arim Ha'el Vachai Et Betzer Bamidbar Be'eretz Hamishor LaRuveni Ve'et Ramot Bagilat LaGadii ואת גולן בבשן למנשי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת האמת, וחיי עולם נוטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. That was awesome. Yasher koach. Seriously. And finally, we call forward Robin, Will, and William Baker, Robin's husband and son, to join Robin up here for her aliyah.
תעמוד, 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 במצווה שנית, רבקה בת פסח ומריין לעלייה לתורה, חזקי וימצאי.
Robin is continuing from chapter 5, verse 28, which can be found on page 1200. Chapter 5, verse 28. Right there. Right there.
That's 11 lines.
That's right there. Ve'ata, and then po, yeah.
Oops, sorry. Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai mevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Ve'ata ho amod imadi va'adabara elecha et kol hamitzvah ve'hachukim ve'hamishpatim asher telamdem ve'asu va'aretz asher anochi noten lahem lerishta ushmartem la'asot ka'asher tziva Adonai Elohechem etchem lo tasuru yamin usmol bechol haderech asher tziva Adonai Elohechem etchem telechu leman tichiyun v'tov lachem v'ha'arachtem ya'amim ba'aretz asher tirashu v'zot hamitzvah ha'chukim v'hamishpatim asher tziva Adonai Elohechem lelamed etchem la'asot ba'aretz asher atem ovrim shama lerishtaha lema'an tira et Adonai Elohecha lishmor et kol chukotav umitzvotav asher anochi mitzavecha ata uvincha uvein bincha kol yamei chayecha uleman ya'arichun yamecha v'shamata Yisrael v'shamarta la'asot asher yitav lecha va'asher tirbun me'od ka'asher diber Adonai Elohei avotecha lach eretz zavahat chalav udevash. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet, v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Yasher Koach, Robin, Alvaro, Penelope, that was awesome to hear you read finally after so much time practicing and learning for today. Yasher Koach. Before returning, or rather before lifting and dressing our Torah, we have a custom of saying a Mishaberach, a prayer for healing in the presence of our Torah. And the idea is to call to mind those most in need of healing when people are most gathered and at attention when the Torah is out. Because we know there are people in our lives who need our attention and perhaps need God's attention, need a little bit of healing of mind, body, or spirit. And so if you are thinking of someone in need of healing of mind, body, or spirit, I want to invite you to share the names of whomever it is you're thinking of at the break in between the stanzas of this Mishaberach prayer. You'll find the words of this Mishaberach on page 371.
To make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen.
We pray on behalf of the following people. It is now time to lift and dress our Torah. And so I want to call forward Bruce Levitt to lift our Torah and Raz Koch to dress it One note about Bruce and Raz. Bruce will become a bar mitzvah next week, and Raz, you deserve a very special shout out as one of the tutors of this B'nai Mitzvah cohort. I know you tutored Robin and so many of the others from this summer. We're really proud of you, Raz. Please come forward, and please rise, all of us, if you are able.
Yamdu, Hamagbiya v'Hagolelet, page 370 in the prayer book. Torah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai beyad Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Morasha kehinat Yaakov, Morasha kehinat Yaakov, Morasha kehinat Yaakov. Torah, tziva lanu Moshe. Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, 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 Nachamu, Ami Yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Elohechem.
Please be seated. And now, before the chanting of our Haftarah, I want to call forward Penelope to offer us her Devar Torah.
Shabbat Shalom. The first time that I came to CBE for a Friday night service was also the first time that I'd entered a synagogue for something other than a classmate's B'nai Mitzvah. I'd slowly been connecting with Judaism for a couple of years, and going to shul seemed like the next logical step. Everything was going pretty well until the actual service started. Suddenly, I found myself completely unable to follow along. Though I recognized the letters in the transliteration, I couldn't string any sounds together. I could hardly even muster a Shabbat Shalom in reply to the person sitting next to me. As I left, I told myself that I would definitely be back, but it took a long time for me to return. This week's Parsha has a lot to say about return, but first, we get a grim prophecy. Moses tells the Israelites that after they've entered the Promised Land, God will scatter their descendants among the nations where they will serve gods of wood and stone made by human hands that cannot see or hear or eat or smell. Classical commentators generally agree that these verses refer to the destruction of the first temple and the ensuing exile to Babylonia. That's why this section of the Torah is read on Tisha B'Av, the fast day commemorating the destruction of both temples that occurred last weekend. An extremely important day in its own right. As Rabbi Green told us earlier, Tisha B'Av is also the culmination of a weeks-long period of mourning. But Moses' prophecy goes on to say, lest the Israelites get too worried, that return from Babylonia is possible. If their descendants search there, they will find their God, if only they seek with all their heart and soul, and in the end, return to their God. Therefore, Moses' prophecy is not only the exile, but also the return that would follow. While the surface level of these texts speaks of a national exile, throughout history there have been commentators who saw a second level of meaning here. They saw an allusion to a more personal exile that one can experience, an exile from God and the Jewish people. Just like national exile, the solution is simple. In return, in Hebrew, teshuvah. But where exactly does this leave us? The verses that I read a moment ago tell us that return, teshuvah, requires seeking with all one's heart and soul. But when I followed my heart to CBE that first night, it did not feel like return. In a way, it felt like the furthest thing from it. When I realized how out of my element I was, I could barely even speak. To my great relief, it turns out that I am not the first Jew to have experienced something like this. Let's rewind for a moment to the book of Exodus. When God orders Moses to lead the Israelites to freedom, Moses at first refuses, saying he is not up to the task because he is too slow of speech and slow of tongue. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, an 18th to 19th century Hasidic leader from what's now Ukraine, takes this to mean that when one is in exile, their ability to speak is also in exile. In Moses' case, God eventually convinces him to take on the task, reassuring him, "I will be with you as you speak and will instruct you what to say." But we can't all count on God whispering in our ears, right? Maybe not in the way that Moses experienced, but what about in more subtle ways? Orchot Tzadikim, a medieval text from Germany, teaches that when it comes to teshuvah, when it comes to return, the thing which is not within your power to attain, the Holy One will give you the strength to do it. Okay, great. That just leads us to another question, right? Where does that strength actually come from? And the Torah offers us one answer. God will not forget the covenant made on oath with your ancestors. You have but to inquire about bygone ages that came before you. We are told to look to the past, to the covenant made with Abraham and Sarah, to the redemption from Egypt, to the revelation at Sinai. But these stories can seem remote, especially for someone already feeling disconnected. What if we looked a little bit closer? Around the time that I began exploring my Jewishness, I also got interested in genealogy. Starting with information that my mom had compiled, I dug further into the past, I sought out primary sources, and recovered the memory of ancestors previously lost to time. One particular joy was locating the graves of many of my great-great and great-great-great-grandparents in Brooklyn, Queens, and New Jersey, locations that were once long forgotten, but which I now visit frequently. Across centuries and continents, I have gotten to know a wonderful cast of characters. Some survive in their letters, some in stories written down, some in portraits or candlesticks or rings, some in headstones, and some in name alone. For me, as someone whose return to Judaism felt a lot more like a first encounter, the process of getting to know these ancestors has been really important. At times on my Jewish journey, when I have felt insecure, alone, confused, like I could never know enough, and like the weight of thousands of years of tradition might just be too much, they have grounded me. Through them, I have found my place in a long line of people who have grappled with Judaism, each in their own way. With their guidance and comfort, I returned. I say comfort both because it's true and because comfort, as we've heard, is kind of a theme of this Shabbat. After reading Moses' prophecies of exile and return, as well as so much else in this parsha, we'll turn to our Haftarah reading from which we get the name for this Shabbat, Shabbat Nachamu, comfort. After weeks of mourning, having just come out of some of the darkest days in the Jewish calendar, this Shabbat is like a big hug. We stop dwelling on the pain of exile and turn our focus to comfort. It begins, Nachamu, Nachamu, comfort, comfort my people. Speak from the heart and declare that the people's exile is over. As with the verses about exile that we discussed earlier, we see a general consensus among commentators that this refers to a national exile. But as before, we can choose to look at this in a more personal light. The text goes on to describe that God will raise every valley and lower every mountain to clear a path for return. So not only do we get to see the promised end to exile, but we also hear that God will go to great lengths, even reshaping the earth's surface to facilitate that return. All of the barriers that may make return more difficult will be broken down. Now think back to the teaching from Orchot Tzadikim that I shared a little earlier, and we see that not only does God create that path for return, but that God also gives one the strength and inspiration to make the journey. But we shouldn't take this to mean that we aren't active participants in return, in teshuvah. we still have to take each step ourselves. Joseph B. Soloveitchik, a major figure of modern orthodoxy in 20th century America, viewed teshuvah as an active, creative process. Through it, one forms one's authentic self, partnering in some small way with God's ongoing process of creation. Your journey may not look like mine, or maybe it does. But no matter the journey, may what today look like steep mountains and deep valleys to be traversed seem to flatten in front of you. May you receive guidance from whoever or whatever pushes you forward, and may you, even if just for today, choose to dwell not on the difficulty of the journey, but on the comfort of how far you have come. Shabbat Shalom.
Penelope, don't go too far because it's now time for you and for Robin to chant Haftarah. So come on back up here, and those of you following along in the Chumash, in that book that says the Torah on it, this is on page 1222, 1222, and as we heard, this is the reason why this Shabbat is called Shabbat Nachamu. It begins with that word, Nachamu. And it's from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, verses 1 through 8, is what we'll be reading today. Again, 1222.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hane'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah Uv Moshe Avdo, Uv Yisrael Amo, Uv Invi'ei Ha'emet B'tzedek. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem, Dabru, Alev Yerushalayim, V'kiru eleha ki mal'a tziva'ah ki nirtza avona ki lokecha meyad Adonai ki flaim b'chol chatotecha kol korei bamidbar Panu derech Adonai, Yashru ba'arava mesila leloheinu. Kol gei yinaseh v'chol har v'giv'a yishpalu v'haya he'akov lemishor v'har chasim levik'a. V'nikla kevod Adonai, v'ra'u chol basar yachdav, ki pi Adonai diber.
Kol omer kura ve'amar Ma ekra kol habasar chatzir v'chol chasto kitzitz hasadeh yavesh chatzir navel tzitz ki ruach Adonai noshva bo Achen chatzir ha'am Yavesh chatzir navel tzitz Udvar Eloheinu ya'akum le'olam
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman, ha'omer ve'oseh, ha'medaber u'mekayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al ha'nevi'im ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha ve'limenucha lechavod u'tifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mevarchim otach Yitbarach Shemcha befi kol chai, tamid leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh haShabbat. Amen.
So now, with our Torah chanting completed and also hearing that Haftarah, we turn to one final Devar Torah. Avro, please join us up here to give us some words of Torah.
Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, buenos dias. If someone had told me 10 years ago that I'd become a bar mitzvah at the age of 36, I thought that they would be joking. At that time, I had just returned to Bogota, Colombia, my hometown, after having spent some time living abroad. I think I've been pretty lucky to be able to move around without too much hassle. I also know that there are millions of people around the world that either want to move or are forced to flee their countries and can't do it in a safe or fulfilling way. People who are in need of refuge and risk their lives to look for a better future. This is what I will be talking to all of you today, cities of refuge. My Torah portion is Va'et Hanan, which recollects many important moments in Jewish history. God giving Israelites the 10 Commandments at Sinai, or the proclamation of God's unity through the Shema. It also has 3 verses that somehow feel lost in the middle of the Parsha. Verses that describe how Moses fulfilled the commandment given by God to set aside 3 cities of refuge on the east side of the Jordan River, Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan. I always thought of cities of refuge as places of protection, places where people could start their lives over. However, the dual purpose of cities of refuge explained in the Bible really struck me. On the one hand, these cities were created to provide protection to a person who had unintentionally killed someone else. The book of Exodus tells us that a man who fatally strikes another man shall be put to death, unless the murder was unintentional. In that case, a place of refuge must be assigned where he will be protected from being killed by the family of the deceased, as was the tradition at the time. On the other hand, cities of refuge were also intended to be a place where the murderer could be judged and safely serve punishment, which is not really what modern cities of refuge are created for. The Talmud in Makot 10a gives us more details on biblical cities of refuge. They should have access to water, be in populated places, access should be properly signaled, and they should have markets, although no weapons were permitted to be sold in those. Anyone who committed manslaughter was commanded to flee to a city of refuge and explain the circumstances to the elders of the city. If the elders were convinced, then the person was welcomed into the city. The elders ensured that an appropriate trial took place and that the person remained there serving punishment until the high priest of the city died, at which point the accused person could return home with no fear of reprisal, having already served appropriate punishment. It feels to me that by design, these cities needed to ensure a minimum living standard for the exiled. This is exemplified further in Makot 11a, which tells us that mothers of the high priests in the cities of refuge would provide sustenance and garments to the exiled. But why would the mothers do this? It seems that it was to discourage the exiled to pray for the high priest's death, as the rules mandated exiles to remain serving punishment in the city of refuge until the high priest died. The more comfortable the exiled were in the city of refuge, the less urgency they would feel to leave, and the less likely it would be that they would pray for the death of the high priests. Regardless, the Bible seems to allude that cities of refuge should be places of dignity, and people should make an effort to ensure the exiled could live a dignified life. I was intrigued by how the concept of biblical cities of refuge could relate to our modern views of refugees and asylum. To unpack this relationship a bit more, I decided to look at the legal definition of asylum. Under US law, you can be granted asylum in this country if you're either the victim of past persecution or you have a well-founded fear of future persecution. In the case of past persecution, you must prove that you were persecuted in your home country based on at least on one of 5 grounds, including race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. While it seems that an intentional killing does not provide a person legal ground to request asylum, and thus the concepts are different in nature, I do think there is a commonality between biblical cities of refuge and modern views on asylum. Both are intended to be life-changing places that allow people to start over without the fear of losing their lives. This topic really feels close to home. In the last few years, we have heard about many refugee crises in the world. People from countries like Syria, Ukraine, and Afghanistan are fleeing their homes looking for havens. Without going too far, I see it in my home country, Colombia. The country has experienced an internal conflict for more than 6 decades that has resulted in millions being displaced from their homes, running away and looking for safer places. Colombia was also a sanctuary for part of my own family. My grandmother and her parents were German Jews who fled Germany in 1937, 4 years after the Nazis gained power in Germany. My ancestors had to flee their country, running from the hatred, discrimination, and threat of being murdered because of their faith. Colombia received them with arms wide open, and they were able to start over. Thanks to one modern city of refuge, I am standing here today, as I am sure some of you are here too. We're living in a post-Trump era filled with racism and xenophobia, which is embodied in some of the highest spheres of power in this country. Bigotry is the license for politicians' attempts to create policies and laws intended to make the lives of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers way more difficult than they already are. Despite all of this, there are a lot of things we can do. From using the power of our votes, selecting candidates that can better shape laws and policies, donating to advocacy or service-providing organizations, or even joining local initiatives such as the Refugee Task Force that we have here at CBE. May we remember that we as Jews were once refugees and that our history informs what we care about. Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher Koach Alvaro, and also to Robin, and also to Penelope. Each of you, through your chanting, through your teaching, through your being, each of you has given us so much today. The past couple of years have required a little bit more homework, but actually each of you already, as we've heard a little bit of, have given so much of yourselves to this community. Meodecha, your very muchness. It's a familiar word, meodecha. We've heard it now a number of times, both in our service and also in the chanting. And traditionally, Jews say it every single day, multiple times a day, as one of those iconic lines in the Shema. B'chol levavcha, uv'chol nafshecha, uv'chol meodecha. With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your meodecha. We often translate it as might or strength, but meodecha more literally means something like your very muchness. Ma'od, 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 very much is what that means in Hebrew. And the ambiguity of the word widens its semantic field. Ibn Ezra says that it's meant to be a superlative, me'odecha, emphasizing the other ways in which a person could love God. Rashi, following the Talmud and presaging future synagogue capital campaigns, says you should give all your wealth in the service of your love of God. And modern scholars also point out its physicality, the idea of very much being somehow associated with things with which we can show our love of God, like a mezuzah or tefillin. Whatever your preference is vis-a-vis translation, what's obvious is that the three of you have given all your very muchness in your pursuit of Torah, meaning, and community building this year. And now, as I know you know, I'm going to call you up and give you a blessing. And I'm going to call you one by one, starting with Alvaro. You were the last to speak, but first to get blessed. Alvaro, in January 2019, Rabbi Timoner forwarded me an email from you looking to learn more about Jewish life in general and CBE in particular. You were seeking answers about a part of your ancestry, but not necessarily looking to convert per se, because that might not make a whole lot of sense. You came to a few services, then enrolled in basic Judaism, and by the time the pandemic began, you were a bona fide member of this community. As we all locked down, CBE had locked you in, just in time for all manner of Zoom classes and services, and then this adult B'nai Mitzvah cohort. In the time since, you've learned, prayed, questioned, and claimed your place in the Jewish people. Officially last summer in one memorable afternoon on Jacob Riis Beach, but unofficially well before then. You mentioned that an early version of yourself would be surprised by this bar mitzvah today. Presumably, he would have also been surprised by your recent trip to Israel, the many people that you now call your friends from that trip and from this place as well, the many books you've now consumed, and this community that now envelops you. May you amaze yourself with the relationships that you continue to forge in this Jewish community. May you wonder at reclaiming a tradition belonging to some of your ancestors, and may you open yourself up to being surprised for a long time to come. And now, Penelope, if you join Alvaro up here, there are echoes of Alvaro's story in your own, seeking out CBE as you excavated your family story in pursuit of Jewish meaning and how it all might fit into your life. I'm glad you chose to come back after that first Shabbat service, and that you made CBE the site of your own return to Judaism, to use your words. You had a rare distinction of enrolling in my basic Judaism class and the adult B'nai Mitzvah class at the same time, sometime in late 2020, which meant that at least for one semester, you were zooming into both of those classes, sometimes catching me when I recycled material. May you always keep your rabbis on their toes. And beyond just those classes with me, you've devoured everything Jewish you could get your hands on these past few years, which has also led you to pursue a master's in Jewish studies. As your return to Judaism takes you far beyond the walls of this congregation, may you take whatever you find and bring it back here to all of us. May Harriet, your cat, have ample opportunities to meow back at you while you chant Torah, as I heard many times. And may your love of all things Jewish permeate the souls of those who love you. And finally, Robin, if you want to join us up here. Robin, though today you are called to the Torah for the first time as a bat mitzvah, you really are no stranger to this very bima. You've already taught us as a congregation before, chanted Torah, and announced so many exciting programs, which you can also read about on our website and in the advisory, Shabbat Shalom. But Robin, as you mentioned in your Devar Torah, it wasn't a given that you'd be so committed to Jewish life, that you'd raise a son in this congregation and become a member of the Board of Trustees. And here I can affirm your own self-assessed performance rating. I've watched you pray, I have watched you learn, I have watched you laugh, and here I'm thinking about that Zoom Seder where I was looking at your screen during one especially inappropriate comedy sketch. I have watched you in so many moments And I've watched you advocate for justice, looking inward in the synagogue and beyond it. You are a lover of God and of Torah, and you are a pillar of this community. May this process of learning toward this day inspire you to engage ever more deeply with a text that you've heard now chanted start to finish many, many times. May you find aspects of Torah that nourish your pursuit of justice and nourish your soul when you most need them. And all of us at CB have your back, we know, as much as you have ours. With all of those blessings, with all those ways of calling attention to who you are and what brings you to this community and to this process, I want to take some of those and wrap you in this tallis. I want to take some of those ideas and those blessings and give you one final blessing. And this, I'll set down my microphone and just bless you privately so we have a moment to share this blessing together.
Siman tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, siman tov, siman tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, siman tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, siman tov. Yehelanu, 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 ulecho Yisrael. Yehelanu, yehelanu, ulecho Yisrael.
Now it is time for all of us to actually return the Torah to the Ark. Please rise.
Page 374. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, page 586 in the middle. Aleinu l'shabeach, Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon hakol, לתת גאולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו גורעים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Page 591 at the top. We bless these B'nai Mitzvah together as we read in English. May we gain wisdom in our lives, overflowing like a river with understanding. Loved each of us for the peace we bring to others. May our deeds exceed our speech, and may we never lift up our hand, but to conquer fear and doubt and despair. Rise up like the sun, O God, over all humanity. Cause light to go forth over all the lands between the seas, and light up the universe with the joy of wholeness, of freedom, and of peace. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד ושמו Please be seated.
As we reach the conclusion of our service, our thoughts turn, as we do each Shabbat, to words of the Mourners' Kaddish. And so if you're here observing Shiva, or the first week of mourning, I want to invite you to please rise and share a name. If you're observing Shloshim, or the first 30 days of mourning a loved one, please rise and share their name. If you're here observing Shana, or the first year of mourning, please rise and share a name. And if you're observing a yahrzeit or the anniversary of a death, please rise and share a name. In solidarity with our mourners, I invite us all to rise as we remember, in particular, those whom we've lost in the last 30 days. Ruth Yavin, mother of Eyal Yavin, mother-in-law of Sue Yavin, and grandmother of Elah, Oren, and Eitan. Ira Judenfreund, father of Melissa Judenfreund, father-in-law of Lee Fogelson, and grandfather of Asher and Pearl. And though the funeral has not yet taken place, we're thinking of Linda Katz, sister-in-law of Jeanette Katz, as well as the following yahrzeits: Linda Barton, Gabriel Baum, Marvin Bernstein, Matthew Burshad, Abraham Bershatsky, Charles Brooks, Samuel Clark, Mildred Drexler, Martin Fisher, Mark Fox, Sonia Fusilier, Alan Gassner, David Gertner, Nancy Gold, Leon Goodman, Solomon Gordon, Liba Greber, Reuben Green, Paul Grossman, Beatrice Hirschberg, Helen Jacobs, Mary Kamens, Ira Katz, Irma Katz, Harry Kirschenbaum, Rabbi Raymond Lyman, Jack Levine, David Levy, William Linder, Clara London, Luba Luria, Betty Mechol, Anna Malter, Suzanne Maltz, Deborah Markendorf, William Marks, David Nachman, Edward Nathan, Cecile Nevin, Hillary Nevin, Hillard Nevin, Hillard Nevin Jr., Emmanuel Newman, Clara Parness, Martin Peters, Julius Poman, Martha Prenner, Mendel Rosenzweig, Sophia Rosenzweig, Arthur Restansky, Cheryl Sanders, Samuel Shine, Roy Solomon, Abraham Spitzer, Martin Stamler, Robert Steckman, David Stein, Leon Ungar, Rochelle White, Doreen Wachowski, and Charles Wolfe. In addition, Robin, we're remembering your parents, Philip and Marion Goldstein. We say Zichronam Livracha, may all of their memories be for a blessing, as we turn to page 598 for words of the Mourners' Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, Ba'agala uvizman kariv imru, amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam olamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitale v'yithalal shemei dekudsha richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata da'amiran v'elma v'imru, amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu Ve'el Kol Yisrael V'imru. Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mromav. Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'el Kol Yisrael Ve'el Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'imru. Amen. May the one who makes peace in the high places make peace over us and over all who mourn, as we say, Amen.
Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom, let's sing it together. Oseh shalom bimromav, Yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru. Amen. Clap your hands, go. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, la 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 la. La 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 la, ya la 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 la, la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru. Amen. Sing loudly. Here we go. And ya la 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 la, go. Come on. And ya la 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 la, even more. Ya la 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 la, ya 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 la, ya la 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 la, la 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 la, even Amen. Ve'imru. Amen.
All right, Shabbat Shalom. If you want to join us over here to make the blessings for Kiddush before moving downstairs, please do. Shabbat Shalom.
Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני השמיים ואת הארץ. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו סברי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. חיים. All right, here's some challah. Let's bless it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Shabbat Shalom. Take some challah, go downstairs, enjoy. Mazel tov.